So this is a story I don't think I've ever talked about. It's been a video that I've been thinking about doing for a while, and seeing as I recently crossed 100,000 subscribers, it feels like a good time to tell it. Instead of sitting here slapping my own ass and congratulating my own success on YouTube, I think it would be far more helpful to instead talk about the failures that I've faced to get to this point. Every once in a while, people ask me why I stopped producing for artists. Almost a decade ago, I tried to become a music producer. I had a little bit of success. I got to work with some incredible artists. Things were going well, but then I stopped. And you might be wondering why and what happened. And that's exactly what I want to talk about today. I want to go over some of the things that I did wrong, mistakes that I made, and ultimately why I failed. And my hope is that if you're thinking of wanting to be a music producer, that maybe this will just help you make some better decisions. Overall, I think there are four major reasons. The first reason that I want to talk about is that I believe I was, and I still am, too introverted to be a music producer. Now, I think that most producers and beat makers probably tend towards being introverts. I think this is actually an advantage in some ways because you need to be okay being alone for long periods of time, just making music. So right away, I want to say that I don't believe that being an introvert automatically prevents you from succeeding. But for me, I am someone who is pretty severely introverted to the point where I think it became a problem. When I first started trying to be a producer, I found it very fun. I would reach out to artists I didn't know, try to talk to them and send them my music. And at the time, I was happy to connect and talk with more and more people, but eventually I started to feel differently. For me, maybe it's the same for you if you're an introvert, but the more relationships that I have, the more stressful my life becomes. And this is exactly what became a problem for me. As I connected with more and more people, I started feeling completely overwhelmed with having to talk with so many people, keeping track of what was going on with each artist, texting them and emailing them back and forth. As my network grew more and more and I had more artists wanting beats from me, I began to find this more stressful and I enjoyed it less and less. And this is one of the factors that resulted in me questioning whether I would be a good fit for this job. If one of the biggest factors in whether I succeed is also one of the biggest causes of stress in my life, then maybe I'm not a good fit for this role. Now, this might be something that you disagree with, but I believe to be a producer, there are other factors outside of how good your music is that will decide how successful you are. And I believe that being the right level of introvert is one of these factors. Unfortunately for me, I think I was just too introverted, and this was one of the reasons why I failed. Moving on to reason number two, one of the errors that I made, I'm not quite sure how to phrase this well, but I think I was just too artistically curious for my own good. So I'll try to explain this a little bit better. Like I mentioned, my network started to grow more and more, and I had more artists reach out to me wanting my beats. And this is especially true when I would work with a bigger artist and they would release a song that I produced. I would get this wave of smaller artists reaching out to me and wanting to work with me. But the problem was that almost every time they would want a beat that was exactly like the beat that was released with that big artist. And this is something that I struggled with because I really do not like making the same type of beat over and over again. For me, what I like best about making beats is having that blank project and exploring new sounds and ideas, figuring out how to put all of them together, and slowly hearing the beat emerge out of nowhere. That's my favorite part of making beats. But if an artist wants a specific type of beat, my favorite part of beat making is now gone. I already know what the beat is going to be and how to make it at that point. And after doing this for so long, it started to feel like a job for me. I just didn't want to be the guy who made the same type of beat over and over again. And I don't want to cast judgment here and sit here and pretend like I'm some ultra artistic cool guy or anything like that. What I mean is that there are certain producers out there who don't have as big of a problem making a similar type of beat repeatedly, and I think that's completely fine. To a degree, I actually believe that that can be a valuable trait if you want to be a producer. If you can make beats that people want and are able to do it over and over again, that's actually a good thing. But for me, I just enjoy being a bit more curious. I love exploring new ideas, maybe to a fault, and even if an artist wants a specific beat from me and is willing to pay me, I still have a hard time saying yes if it's something that I've already made. And I believe that this is actually a bad thing if you want to be a music producer. So once again, I just don't think I was a good fit for this reason either. Moving on to reason number three, which is needing too much control. Now there are two sides to this coin. There's one side of it where I'm going to take full responsibility. One of the things that I really didn't like about producing was sending my beats out to a bunch of different artists and not ever knowing what was happening or whether my beats were being used. Oftentimes, it would take months or even years for an artist to hit me back and let me know that they wanted to use one of my beats. I actually got a DM, I think it was last year, from an artist asking me about a beat that I sent him 8 years ago. And for me, this just created a lot of unsurety and because of that, a lot of stress. If this was going to be my career and yet I have no idea whether an artist is going to use my beat until years later, I just personally find that difficult to manage. And this is something that producers just have to be okay with. It's ultimately up to the artist to make that final decision about what beats they want to use. And often they won't even know the answer for a very long time until their album is done. So a producer has to be okay with not having a solid answer at all times. But for me, I just had a hard time dealing with this, and I take full ownership of that. I think I just require a bit more control over my own future. Having said that, there is another part of this, which is that I got screwed over a lot, and I no longer wanted to put up with it and didn't want to work with artists anymore. What would happen was I would send beats over to artists, I would never hear from them again, and then months later I would see that they dropped a mixtape and they used my beats without telling me, let alone paying me. And at times they wouldn't even bother crediting me either, which is really frustrating. And as this happened more and more, it just made me want to do something else. Now, having said that, I think this is a story that's actually pretty common for producers. I think every producer has at least one story of them getting screwed over. And there may be certain producers who actually don't get affected by this as much and would just keep it moving and find artists and people who are ethical and do communicate and work with them instead. But again, for me, the underlying lack of control was just too big of a problem for me to manage, which is yet another reason I believe I'm just not a good fit for producing. But I actually think this is why YouTube has been going well for me so far. With YouTube, these negative traits when trying to be a music producer are actually positive traits for what I do now. Me being an introvert helps me because I can just focus on the work itself, and I don't really need to depend on relationships or a network in order to succeed. All I have to do is make sure I help you, and I'm good. Me being too curious is an asset now because after spending all that time making so many different styles of music, I've just learned so much more, and I'm able to help you even more with my videos because I just have a lot more to share. And me being a control nut isn't a problem because the success of my channel, it all falls on me. The control's all mine, and if a video of mine fails, I have absolutely no one to blame but myself. So I just wanted to say that if everything that I've talked about so far feels discouraging to you because you're similar to me, there are other paths that you may be a better fit for. But this leads me to my last point, which is probably the most personal and probably the hardest to talk about. You might think that all the points that I've made just sound like a bunch of excuses, and maybe my beats just suck and I just don't have what it takes to make it. I really have no way to argue against this. It's ultimately up to you to judge how good my music is. Another thing that you might be thinking is that maybe I just didn't want it bad enough. That if I really wanted to be a music producer, I would have figured out a way despite all my shortcomings. And this is where I want to talk about my fourth point, which I think is actually the most important thing that you should think about. If I were to ask you why you want to be a music producer, I think that you would probably have a lot of positive reasons. You might want to share your art with the world. You might want to create something beautiful for everyone to hear. You might like the idea of someone's day just being better after listening to your music. And I think all of these points are probably true and valid. But at the same time, I also believe that for many of us, we don't do this for entirely positive reasons. And looking back, that was definitely true for me. Around the time I was trying to be a music producer, my life wasn't in the best place. I didn't really feel great about who I was. I didn't like what I was doing in life. I felt like a complete outsider a lot of the time. At this point in my life, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I went to school for business, which was a mistake. I didn't really have any interest in it. I didn't like it. The only reason why I went to business school was because my older brother did. That was literally my entire reasoning. And because of this, I just felt like an outsider the entire time. My personal relationships weren't that great at the time either. I had a hard time making new friends because I was just so different than the people around me. I was the only person who I knew that liked making beats, which made me feel even more alone. I just had a lot of other problems in my life as well. I did not like the way I looked. I used to be really scrawny and lanky, and so I often felt really uncomfortable with myself, and I was just constantly single as well. Overall, I just had so many big problems in my life, and all of these problems led me to feel pretty low about myself. And I think this is partly why I wanted to be a music producer so badly. To me, producers are like magicians. They are the people who I admire the most, the people who create all this amazing music that I loved. I just thought they were all just so incredible. And looking back, I now realize that I wanted to be a music producer partly just to feel like I had some self-worth. That maybe if I can become one of these amazing people that I admire, that I would feel better about myself. And at first, it kind of worked. I remember the first time I got an email back from a rapper telling me he really liked one of my beats. It felt like I was on top of the world. I finally felt like maybe I had some value, but then a few days later, those feelings went away and I went right back to normal life. I went right back to not feeling that great about myself. And then after that, I remember when one of my beats got released on one of the biggest blogs on the internet and I saw my name there as the producer. I felt like I was on top of the world again. And then a few days later, I just went right back to not feeling all that great about myself. And the cycle just repeated over and over again. I thought maybe if I kept doing this, I would finally reach some finish line. I would finally get to a point where I felt okay with myself if I achieved some level of success. Eventually, though, I realized the mistake that I was making. I was basically creating a life where I only had one thing that made me feel okay. It's like I kept trying to fill this hole that was in me by being a producer instead of actually fixing all the problems and learning how to feel better about myself. And this for me was just not a good way to live. And that's part of the reason why I eventually stepped away. And that's also what eventually led me here to doing YouTube. As strange as it sounds, the reasons why I'm here now and why things are better for me are because of things completely outside of making music. I focused on fixing my life, finding new friends, working out and feeling better about how I looked, going out on dates, being in a relationship, just fixing all the things that made me feel bad about myself. And because of that, I didn't have to rely on just this one thing, being a producer, to make me feel good about myself. And that freed me up to actually make better decisions about what's best for me, which is exactly what eventually led me here to you. So that's one of the biggest things that I hope you think about and why I wanted to bring this up. Really think about why you're doing this and why you want to be a music producer. Because if you're doing this for the wrong reasons like I did, no amount of success is going to make you feel okay. You have to figure out how to do this for yourself. So that's my story. A whole lot of talking, I know. 100K is a huge milestone, so thank you to all of you who have clicked that button to help me get here. Anyways, I'll see you next week.